Hey, what's going on? I think we needed a palate cleanser after the weekend releases of pop music, and there was a good palate cleanser for us. Hey, the song that we've been using as a title track in this series is one called Sabotage by the Beastie Boys, and if it's not your genre and if it's not your era of music, this song is actually quite legendary, and it's quite legendary for a couple of reasons. The first is, back in a time period where music videos were a thing, and I know they still put music videos together, and that's still a thing, but you had to be there. It was just different. Like, there was a pretty legendary music video because it was more like a mini movie, and that was a really big deal at the time. The second is that it's one of those places where rap and rock converge and actually age well. If you need a comparison, see Kid Rock. Like this one kind of holds. And then the third reason is because it's one of those anthems that you kind of turn up at those moments where you feel like the world is out to get you. You know, you may have some moment tomorrow where like you're driving to your place of employment on I-95 and you're thinking to yourself, why did you all text each other and aim to ruin my Monday? Like, are you guys all in on this together? You collection of drivers in the city, whatever it may be for you. It was one of those just lyrically one of those themes where we get the vibe of feeling like everyone's out to get us. And so you've been spending the weekend, and I made a joke about it that it was just being silly about a moment ago. Like you spent the weekend as with pop music. When you don't get a clear explanation of who is the song about and what is the song about, as you've decompressed and downloaded and thought about the Tortured Poets department this weekend, and you've wondered like, who wronged you, Taylor? Who hurt you that time? And are you going to be okay? We want you to be okay. And what is the album about Travis going to be like? In the same way, the song Sabotage is one of those moments where we kind of go, man, what was the influence? What was going on that made you say these things you said? Like, who hurt you? What was going on in your life, man? And so, as is often the case when it's ambiguous culturally, it sells better, one, but then people kind of fill in the blanks. And so for many, many years, people wondered if Sabotage was like an anti-government song. Was it an anti-church and religion song? Because, certainly there would be people that would go rock and rap together, get off my lawn, And then other people thought, if you know kind of the history of the Beastie Boys and New York City hip hop, it was like, it's paparazzi and celebrity, it's a song about all of that. And the answer to the above is none of it. It's not about any of that. The answer was finally given a few years ago when the Beastie Boys put out sort of an anthology biography about kind of their work. And once and for all, Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys answered the question, what is Sabotage about? And the answer is their producer. It's a song about their producer. They were putting together their fourth studio album. There was some heat being put on them as they were transitioning from the vibes of the 80s hip-hop scene to what the early 90s was going to warrant. And there was a lot of intentionality and introspection being given, though a producer would be like, hey, we got deadlines here. We got things we got to get done. And so the collision between the artist tinkering with like, well, we haven't got it perfect just yet. We have to go back to the laboratory. And the producer that's like, no, we're getting paid to deliver something really good and transcendent here, as a way to sort of like break through some of what the producer thought was procrastination. He put together a sample and was like, hey, if you don't get this, like if you don't get this done, this is what I'm putting out for you. And that first line, like if you know that song, that's like the part I want to like get up and sing every time. I can't stand it. I know you planned it. That the opening lines to that song are Ad Rock's response to what the producer put in front of them, like as a proposition of like, here's what we're going to do. Here's a sample I put together for you. And so Ad Rock says it this way. He says, I decided it would be funny to write a song about how Mario was holding us all down, how he was trying to mess it all up, sabotaging our great works of art. Which is all the more reason why this song hits. Not just as like a 30-second bumper, but it actually hits the core of what this series is about. which is not like the idea of the world sort of converging upon us and being out to get us and ruin your day and kill your vibe. But instead, a lot of times the ways in which the internal pressures and deadlines and shoulds that we're feeling are made into reactions by the situations and the pressures that are being put upon us. Right? Like how what happened yesterday went into that meeting tomorrow type of stuff. Not because they have any correlation or connection to one another, but purely because how you carried it. And so this series has been about the ways in which we think about the pressures and the influences that are sort of getting at us, getting to us, and the way that we're bringing that into marriages, the way that we're bringing that into relationships, the way we're bringing that into our friendships, and the way that we're bringing that into our, did I say workplaces? Well, if I didn't, I intended to. Workplaces too, right? And all the layers of our life. So week 1, we talked about the idea, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me, right? Like, it's yeah. So we give love to Taylor too, right? We got that, right? Like, that we are the problem. We've got the baggage, that the way that we're wielding that baggage is kind of a big deal. And then last week we talked about the idea of complacency, how a lack of intentionality is something we all deal with, right? There's the things that we sort of feel like we should be doing versus the things we actually are doing. And today I want to dig a little deeper at that by talking about what those pressures, what's creating the shoulds. Like what's creating the tension between the things we know we should be investing in and the ways we actually spend our time, the baggage we actually bring into the relationship, the things that we don't want to deal with. What pressures are we dealing with as we go about that journey? We're going to look at 1 Kings chapter 12, which maybe being a successor to a famous king is not a pressure you have ever felt, but following someone who carries a big shadow, right? Are you the younger brother? Are you the younger sibling? Are you the person that's taking over for someone in the office and it's creating this leadership vacuum and the whispers and the reply alls of like, I hope we finally get good coffee in the break room or whatever it is. Like that is what is happening in 1 Kings chapter 12. Solomon, the great King Solomon, is dead. And people, weirdly, are kind of excited about it. Why, you say? Well, because Solomon is one of those cats where he has a lot of wisdom. He's got a lot of information about how the world works. Do you know anyone like this? But isn't always great at applying it to real world situations. And so behind Solomon's leadership, there is some relational messes. There is some partnerships that do not align with God's intention for Israel. And there is, now at this point, the people who have been harmed by the policies of Solomon, sort of thinking to themselves, like, perhaps this is our moment as Solomon's son Rehoboam is coming into power. Let's check this out. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. All right, so we're looking at this through Rehoboam's lens. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke that's put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days and then come back to me. And the people went away. Let's make an interesting observation that's not really where we're going to go in our time together. But if you were with us pre-Easter, remember that the Israelites were trying to escape Egypt and get away from Egypt for this oppression that they had experienced and internalized. And God was trying to, through the desert, get all of the ways of Egypt out of them so that they could go to this place and create a place of flourishing that would be an example to the nations. And did you catch what's happening? People are actually leaving Israel to go to Egypt and get out of a sense of oppression that they feel. Think on that later, right? But so that's what's happening in the reign of Solomon. The reign of Solomon is good for Solomon, and it's good for a lot of things. It's good for a lot of stuff. But there is some people, and there are some people who are going, hey, that didn't work for us. And in this new moment, what is it going to be different? Jeroboam's got a voice of influence amongst that contingent. So Jeroboam is in, and he's going to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Rehoboam, who is the king now, it says, hey, give me 3 days to figure this out. And let's look at what he does with those 3 days. Verse 5, Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days, come back to me. The people went away. King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. They replied, if today you will be a servant of these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. Now, they give some good advice, right? And it's advice you likely would take if you're stepping in new at a position. You're taking over for someone. You're going to do probably some version of that. It might be surveys. It might be working lunches. It might be something. It was like, hey, what worked around here? What didn't work around here? I mean, where Rehoboam starts is a pretty good place to start, right? The people that worked and served alongside Solomon, that informed some of these decisions, that knew the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, knew all that stuff. And what do they say to him? It's sort of ambiguous and Yoda-ish, but what does it point to? It points to if you want these people to rock with you, if you want them to follow your leadership, maybe you need to relent on some of these policies and ways that we used to do things before. Particularly, by the way, like heavy emphasis on unpaid labor, leveraged workforce, and heavy taxation are some of the policies that we're talking about here. Right? Even the people that may have said to Solomon at one point in time, hey, that was a good idea for that moment. Crisis leadership warranted that kind of response. You can hear it in their advice without really throwing Solomon under the bus, like, hey, maybe it is time to think about a different pathway, as you're coming into the place. So they would align maybe a bit with what Jeroboam's interested in. But what do they do? What does Rehoboam choose to do? Let's look at verse 8. Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, what is your advice? How should we answer the people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with him replied, these people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Now, if you need something to do for the next 15 minutes, you concoct a reality where you could make that I don't know how to manifest that, right? Make the scorpion sort of actively work against you. I guess there was a rock movie where he was the Scorpion King. Maybe that's what it is, right? Rehoboam did you catch what got repeated there? What got repeated was who are these people? They're his boys. They're like the people he grew up with. When the Bible repeats itself, let your ears go up like the dog that hears treat. Right? Let it go, wait a second, what's going on there? It's giving you a distinction between these wise elders and the people that grew up with Rehoboam. Now, what is likely to be true about the people that grew up with Rehoboam if he is the king's son? They probably haven't worked very hard in their life. It's not to minimize maybe the intellectual work that they've done, but the manual work, the massive taxation. There's a pretty good chance, if we're keeping score, that they're the people benefiting from these policies versus being adversely impacted by the policies, right? So whether it's all a game to them, let's see if Rehoboam will actually do it, sometimes you say to people, go up and say to this person, and then they're like, well, I didn't want you to actually do it. Whether they're doing that or they mean it from a status quo posture, place of life, let's not let go. Or by the way, you're Solomon's kid. You got a pretty weird legacy here. You got to double down. You better achieve something. They tell him to flex. He flexes. everybody comes back, and this is where I'll just summarize for you. Everybody comes back and is like, okay, man, what's it going to be? Rehoboam, what are we going to do? And what does he parrot? He doesn't take the wisdom given to him by the politicians and the leaders and the council that have years of serving. He listens to his boys. He listens to the people he grew up with. And guess what happens? It all works out. Everyone flourishes. It's a beautiful time in Israel. No, it's actually the gateway to rebellion. If you look at verse 16, the people, like the vibe that begins to shatter around the coronation is, what share do we have in David? What parts of Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David. Like everybody's running to just sort of take care of their own. Like this moment of national unity and oneness is now entirely fractured by this desire to like, oh no, like everybody take care of themselves. By the end of the chapter, we're going to move to a time of a divided kingdom. We're going to move to a time where like Jeroboam is leading a contingent, Rehoboam is leading a contingent, and it's not one Israel. It's not this shining light of how God's character and kingdom shape and mold the hearts of people to treat one another differently. It is a place that's just as politically jacked as every other place in the region at the time, and just as territorial as every other place in the time. And it's quite a way to follow the legend of King Solomon, right? It does not go well. Now, here is what I want to say as a guy who's like emerging onto the get off my lawn season of my life. Like what I want to say to you is like, well, see, listen to your elders. See what happens when you don't listen to your elders? Because I'm one of them. You know, like it's what we want to say there. But what's actually more likely to be true is this tension. There is probably on some level a gap between, there's no shortage of information for Rehoboam. He has all the information he needs to make wise decisions. But the pressures internally that he is feeling and experiencing lead him to manipulate the information to actually make decisions that are harmful for him, harmful for his leadership, and harmful to the society as a whole. And that is a pressure I think you probably can relate to, right? Maybe not on a societal level, maybe that's an overreach. But have you ever just done some things where you're like, yeah, that was probably not the right advice to take? That person probably wasn't the right person to listen to. Proverbs 13:20, ironically written by Solomon, walk with the wise and become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. You know, and that's something you feel pretty acutely in your story, something you know to be true, something you've seen happen amongst friends. You've been that friend. Maybe you are the person that's like, go say this to this person, and then the person does, and you're like, I didn't mean it. Why'd you listen to me? Paul says it this way in 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. And again, here's where we want to like move from get off my lawn to having a real conversation about what may have been bouncing around in Rehoboam's mind that would lead him to like not listen to the wisdom that seems to be a pretty clear home run wisdom, even if he's not quite sure how to get there, versus the thing that just is really rooted in self-preservation. Some of it comes down to the shoulds, right? Like the pressure you feel, the pressure I feel, the pressure we all feel. Well, this is where I should be. This is how it should go. I should live up to the standard that Solomon put forth. I should do some things that make sure my guys are taken care of. Really, what we're having with Rehoboam is a question of formation. Not just a question about what advice do we listen to in any given situation, though that would be true and probably helpful for your purposes today, but in your marriage, in your approach to dating, in how you define success amongst friendships, in how you navigate complex working relationships, whether it's like trying to get the most out of your team or trying to deal with the person who's trying to get the most out of their team. You know, what what are we allowing to form the way the world should work as we step into those environments? This is a question not just of application, but a question of formation. What voices were forming and speaking to Rehoboam? And then how did he process those pressures? And what decision did he make? Dallas Willard talked extensively about this in his years as a USC professor and theologian. And one of the things he sort of makes a whole career of remarking about is a Christianity that's reduced to simply behavior modification is sort of a Christianity devoid of its real power, right? Like if we just lump Christian behaviors into these are the things you should be doing and these are the things you should not be doing because God says so. Like, okay, like that makes sense. God's God. Like that tracks. But if you've ever actually tried to live that way, it just feels so impractical based on the pressures you feel at a lunch table, the pressures you feel in your circles of friendship, and the pressures you feel about whatever arbitrary cultural definitions of success. This is where I'm supposed to be at 20 and 25 and 30 and so on and so forth. So Willard says, hey, what we really have to pay attention to when it comes to the decisions we make isn't just the right decision, but the things that are forming those decisions. And then he goes in a little bit further with this in his book, Renovation of the Heart, to say it's the reality of the human spirit that images, ideas, and information are things that we've all been formed by. I'll break those down for you in a minute. That that your decisions that you're making today, like some of the pressures and some of the shoulds and some of the influences and some of your Mario Cataldos, like, where are the images that you've been given somewhere at some point, the ideas that you've been given somewhere at some point, and the information that you've absorbed is true. Like the ideas, for example, the images, for example, of like you're given sort of cultural standards of beauty, and they may look different than when you're in high school versus when you're 35. There's images that you're being sold that are like, this is what the right amount of square footage is to be successful. This is the right place to raise your family, and like some of them you're not even aware of. But if you just think about the billboard, the algorithm that like is talking to your phone after you Google something that's like, well, you need all these things because this is the image to aspire to. Like that's a real thing that like happens in our story. Ideas. If you grew up in the United States, you have a definition, you have some words and feelings attached to the word freedom that may not be true if you grew up in another country. That there's a standard of living attached to happiness that may not be true if you grew up in Mexico or Cuba or somewhere else that just wasn't here. Or even just state to state. I grew up in North Carolina and looked like. Information, what we decide and discern is true about how the world works. What is false information and fake news, and what is real? This is really easy for us to identify after the fact. Like, for example, you'll see one here on the screen. Like, this was a real thing that existed in the 1960s, like images, ideas, information, that like, here, smoke Camel cigarettes, because doctors think that if this is the right way to go about smoking, right? Like a good fresh, give your throat a vacation. Like, right, this doesn't age well, but would have been very normal at a particular time and a particular way of understanding how the world works. Well, you have some images, ideas, and information that you just sort of assume to be true. That like you get to the, and you just like, okay, this is just how the world works. And the way of Jesus is inviting you to say, now wait a second, hold on. Not so fast. What if there's a better definition of freedom? What if there's a better definition of happiness? What if there's a better definition of American dream? What if there's a better definition of beauty? What if there's a better definition of a healthy marriage or a thriving friendship or a good roommate like working relationship? What if there's a better one than the one the algorithm is feeding you? And that is really the core of what Rehoboam is wrestling with. There is some wisdom to pursue. There is some wisdom to seek after. But you and your boys are like trending always towards safety and security. When there's this other path available to us. And let's let this wash over our definitions of relationships and success in our marriages and our approach to dating. And what we'll probably find is that there are some pictures that we've absorbed and normalized that the way of Jesus is saying, now hold on. This is not just about behave yourself. Like Paul spills massive amounts of ink talking to the Corinthians and the Ephesians and the Romans about, hey, you understand some things culturally, but the way that we're going to relate to one another as it relates to God's character is different. Like there's a bigger picture of freedom than what your city offers, than the sexual behaviors of this city or the definitions of money that like sort of mark this place. So how do we, as followers of Jesus, and if you look at the early church, the disciples even, in calling Jesus Lord, it's not just adopting a series of behaviors and listen to your elders, young man, listen to your elders, young lady, listen to Jesus, young Padawan, but to say, how does the love of Christ help us unlearn some things that we've learned, learn some new ways to process the heavy burdens and yokes that we deal with in this space and time that we find ourselves in, and relearn over and over when we continue to sort of trust in maybe cultural definitions of success and happiness. The way of Jesus continues to walk with us and nudge us toward a narrow path that Jesus describes as is not burdensome, but light. And this is not as simple as like, just listen to your elders, but to say, hey, pay attention to the things that are forming you. Like if you want to live differently in your approach to relationships, if there's a machine that keeps generating things that like do not yield what they promise, let's look at like what's inside here and what's producing these particular things, so that we might ask, how do we live differently? And what we'll find, and this is where the father-son pressure is really interesting, right? When Solomon talks about wisdom in the Proverbs, it's like there's this thing to pursue and go after. Lady Wisdom is this personified being that we have to go seeking for. It doesn't just land on our lap like one of the cicadas will in a few weeks. You know, it doesn't just sort of like swarm about us and smack us in the face. It's something that we've got to go chase after and pursue and find. And how many of us, like what we just want is the pressures and like, just give me the right answer for how to have a good marriage, man. Just give me the right answer that will make my kids not hate me. Like just because I feel those pressures at my workplace, I just don't want to get fired. Like I want to do a good job. Give me the answer that'll shut up all the critics and will make everybody happy and will make people not flee to Egypt. The information was there for Rehoboam, but it wasn't pursued. It wasn't absorbed. It wasn't internalized. It didn't move from head to heart. And so Proverbs 12:1 says this: whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. Whoever hates correction is stupid. Solomon's been both. Proverbs 27:6, confront what is often, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. This is not licensed to be a jerk, by the way. This is not, just wounds from a friend, man. Just wounds from a friend. You know, I just say this thing to you in a terrible tone with terrible timing. Wounds from a friend. No, but what it's actually speaking to is there is something special to those of us who put ourselves in a position with some vulnerable people to walk with us. It's not always pleasant to do the right thing. It's not always pleasant to think about the operating system and forming our pictures of a successful relationship and forming our pictures of a successful parenting win and forming our pictures of what it means to be a successful citizen of our city. But it's vital if we're going to walk in the way of Jesus and walk in that invitation to freedom of an easy burden and an easier yoke than the pressures that Rehoboam faces, to ask ourselves, are we proactively pursuing wisdom relationally, physically, mentally, spiritually? Or are we just sort of hoping it smacks us in the face? Because Rehoboam's a good example of it. It can be right there in front of you. Or in Solomon's case, right? It can be right there in the mind, and you still don't do anything about it, right? Celebrity culture, you get this. When you track the anatomy of like some sort of fall from grace culturally, years after when the Netflix documentaries come out, there is a trope. The trope is there were a bunch of people that already knew that person was a jerk, but you had to feed the machine. We had to keep generating product. We had to keep getting after it. We had a bottom line. I had mouths to feed. I had kids in college. Right? Like, one of the things that's sort of tragic for both the person impacted by the celebrity in question and what's tragic for the celebrity is that no one is saying no. And no one's saying hold up because there's always a bottom line. And the way of Jesus, though difficult as it relates to Christian community and formational habits and the reality that sometimes brunch is just easier and you didn't want to get up this morning, or that Christian community is hard, it's hard to go into a church and like connect with new people and be the new person. For all of the tensions that exist in that space, there exists the need for your life, for people to tell the truth to you about you. And then the core of transformation is opening our hearts and lives to a space like that. And so when we come to the Lord's table, we're not just checking a box that's like, cool, I'm like 10 minutes from my smartphone and all of its pressures. It's an invitation to reframe. Rehoboam is projecting a heavy yoke. Why? Because it's easier for him and it feeds the machine. Matthew 11, Jesus says, hey, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. The Message paraphrase says, come and learn from me the unforced rhythms of grace. What that doesn't mean is that it's easy to follow Jesus. But that the lordship of Jesus walks with us differently than the burdens and pressures that many of the things informing our definition of health do. That's what we celebrate at the Lord's table. That's what we come to receive. That's what we come to be reminded of. There's 4 gluten-free stations in this room. I just would invite you to bring the burdens and pressures. Like, I got these definitions of success. I'm lonely. I'm sad. God, help me to see how to carry these things differently in light of your love. Let me pray for us. We'll enter that time. God, may we not reduce this chapter to some sort of like simple life lesson about listening to our elders. It's good advice, perhaps, but there have been elders whose scripts and narratives and have created trauma and fear. And we're trying to figure out how the way that you offer is a better way than the one being carved out for us. We think about your sacrifice. We think about what you've conquered. We think about your resurrection in this sacred space. Help us to know how to carry those things differently in light of your love. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.